Now, my next guest has been closely following this tug-of-war between emerging and developed economies on the global stage. Michael Spence is a Nobel laureate in economics and the author of the book, The Next Convergence. He is the former dean of the Stanford Business School and a consultant to the investment firm Pimm. Michael Spence, good to have you with us on Bloomberg. You heard what Niall Ferguson was talking about. Is it really necessary that the International Monetary Fund have a European as its head in order to confront the European debt crisis?
No, I don't think it's necessary, but I do think Niall's right that probably that will be the outcome. The two major risk factors in the global economy are the American fiscal situation and the European sovereign debt and euro situation. And I think having a European who's widely respected at the IMF would be widely viewed as a very big plus. And frankly, I think the emerging economies will go along with that on this round.
Now, do you think that Greece will default no matter who is going to be at the head of the IMF? Will there be a reprofiling as they describe it right now?
Greece will almost surely default unless there is a major bailout package that's agreed on by the Europeans and the IMF. But in order to achieve that outcome, the Greeks have to bear some of the burden, and they have to agree internally on how they, as citizens of the country, are going to agree on it, and they are having difficulty doing that.
Now, as someone that's studied a lot about emerging market economies, what do you think the perception is in places such as China and Brazil and India when they look at the demands of Greece on an international organization like the IMF?
Well, they have some sympathy. Most of these countries, with the exception of China, have been there before. They've had crises, they've required external assistance, and they've required fairly dramatic and draconian measures to stabilize things. In the case of Brazil, it's been hyperinflation. In the case of India, it was a financial crisis in the early 90s. So they understand that countries can get into this situation, and they appreciate that an appropriate form of external assistance is probably required. So they won't have a problem with this general idea.
Short-term fixes versus long-term solutions. Does anybody really have a grasp of what's necessary for Europe?
Well, I think there is a grasp of what is necessary. The problem in Europe is that it's a fragmented entity, even though it's partly unified around the euro and around the openness of the economy. But from a fiscal point of view, it's decentralized, and they have to sort of agree how to share the bailout burden. This is the burden-sharing issue, and I think they probably will ultimately reach a resolution, but it's a lengthy and difficult process, Pimm.
Through that process, will we see more pressure on the euro?
Yes, I think you can predict with reasonable confidence that until there's a definitive solution, as opposed to sort of liquidity, temporary fixes, that you'll have periodic bouts of contagion and instability and volatility in the euro.
Michael Spence, we were talking during the break, and you said that you've worked and you've met with Dominique Strauss-Kahn in the past. What can you tell us about him personally and about his tenure at the International Monetary Fund? Is it going to make a difference that he's not there?
Oh, let me put it this way. The International Monetary Fund, in part because of Dominique Strauss-Kahn's efforts, is literally packed with talent. And so in some sense, part of his legacy is to leave an institution that's extraordinarily capable and I have no doubt will continue to function and make major contributions to global governance, to the European situation, and so on. So one should not assume that this was a one-man band. On the other hand, in part because of his extraordinary characteristics, his intellect, his personableness, his relationships, his ability to operate, as Eshwar said, at multiple levels. He's built an extraordinarily strong institution, and he will surely be missed.
If you had to bet, who would be the next head of the International Monetary Fund?
I think, as I said before, that it will be a European, and it looks like the emerging consensus among the Europeans is around Christine Lagarde, very capable and talented finance minister of France.
Now, the head of the IMF gets a 5-year term. Is it likely that the next head of the IMF will come from an emerging market country?
I believe on the next round, assuming that we've stabilized things here in America and in Europe, and are setting out on a course of redesigning the international monetary and exchange rate system, which many people, including the governor of the Central Bank of China, Zhou Xiaochuan, believe needs fixing, and everybody who says that is absolutely right. I believe it probably will be somebody from one of the major emerging economies, Pimm.
Now, as part of that theme of a major emerging economies, talk a little bit about the relative increase in wealth around the world and including the disparities that exist. What are we going to do about that?
Well, what I think in the long run we're seeing is a massive amount of growth in the emerging economies in the post-war period, which is literally causing poverty rates to drop at rates that we never believed possible. There are countries that are not growing, that have governance problems and seem to be stuck. And in those countries, there's a far less optimistic outlook. But in the global economy as a whole, we're on a journey to having, something like 75% of the world's population living in advanced countries like our own, with a starting point in the post-war period of 15%. So it's just an amazing change. The global economy is is set to triple or quadruple in size in the next 20 to 30 years.
Do we have an economic system or indeed any kind of management of the global economic system that can handle that kind of growth?
Not right now, we don't. Global growth and global interconnectedness is clearly outrunning the economic management and governance institutions at the international level. So a major project for the future to accommodate this growth and to reduce the potential volatility that it might create is to build the confidence and build the institutions and confidence in them. And that's a long-term project, Pimm.
Michael Spence, how do we retain confidence, let's say, in the United States when we see so much of the growth coming from places such as China and Brazil? How do we remove some of the fear, the insecurity that their growth comes at our expense?
I think we should reassure the American people that while we have challenges in the short and medium term, part of it structural, part of it recovering from a very serious shock, the crisis, that our long-term future is really quite bright. We have an innovative, flexible economy with a lot of talented people. We have great companies, and we're going to have a global economy to play in, and where I think we will succeed, with flying colors. People tend to think of this as a zero-sum game, where if they win, we lose. This is not a zero-sum game. The global economy is going to be gigantic. It's true that in the post-war period, right after World War II, we didn't have much in the way of competition. Now we have lots of talented competitors in Europe. And in another 20 years, we'll have lots of talented competitors in China and India.
We've got to leave it there. Nobel laureate Michael Spence, the author of The Next Convergence. Thank you very much.